The Pittsburgh Penguins, along with its fans, have been absolutely spoiled with plenty of talent over the years, including many who have made their way into the Hall of Fame and those who will make their way one day. Hunter and I are going to talk about that and more on this edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp. You can follow me on Twitter at synonym for wet. Joined as always by the one and only Hunter Hodes. You can follow him on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can give our show's account a follow at LO_Penguins. And we thank you for making this your first listen or watch of the day because we're your team every day. And don't forget that we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts as well as YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, Hunter, we're fully in the dog days of summer, and it appears that just about everybody in the NHL, save for a few teams and managers, are on vacation. They're at the beach. They're up at the cottage. They're doing whatever they do in the offseason as we get even closer to training camps in the preseason. So that means we get to have some fun discussions on this show. And today's first segment, I'm basing off of an article that The Athletic dropped today, which is basically what they're referring to as their Hall of Fame tiers. And it focuses solely on players who are still active in the National Hockey League, players that they believe could one day make their way to the Hall of Fame. They had a couple different tiers. They basically had their top tier, which was locked in, which assumes, hey, if these guys decided today to say, you know what, I'm done, I'm retiring, they're in the Hall of Fame. Then there's fringe guys. Then there's check back in a few years, which are some of the younger players who are on a Hall of Fame trajectory or at least close. So rather than go over that entire article and discuss players in the NHL, I wanted to localize this more to the Pittsburgh Penguins because when you look at their locked category of guys who are going to make the Hall of Fame, there's a lot of Penguins there and a guy who was a Penguin for a long time. Basically, they have Sidney Crosby. No crap. Of course, he's going to make it to the Hall of Fame. He's one of the top 10 players of all time. Evgeny Malkin, one of the best, if not the best Russian player to ever play, between him and Ovechkin and a few others. Definitely one of the best players out of Russia in the history of the game. Chris Letang, who I'm skeptical on that one, but I do think he maybe isn't so much a fringe guy, so much as like he's going to get in, but it won't be his first, second, or even third ballot. He feels like a guy who fourth, fifth year of eligibility, they're probably going to put him in.
It won't be a first ballot, but he's still a lock to get in. I mean, look at the accomplishments he's had. Look at the career he's had overall. Best franchise defenseman in this franchise's history. He's a lock for me.
Yeah, I mean, we'll keep the discussion going here in a minute. Let me finish off this list. Erik Karlsson, two-time Norris winner, one of the best defensemen of the modern era. He's absolutely going to get in. And then, of course, former Penguins goalie Marc-Andre Fleury, they also have in their lock category as well. And then you look at just the amount of talent that has come in and out of the Penguins since Mario Lemieux was drafted. And it's absurd that for 40 some years, this team has played host to Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer. And we are just so spoiled as a fan base to have watched some incredibly elite talent play for this franchise. But the place I wanted you to start, because you were talking about this to me all morning and before we hit record, is Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, I think he's a lock to get in. He's gonna get the wins record. He's got multiple Stanley Cups. He's got a Vezina trophy. One of the best goalies of the modern era. But you brought up a really good point, and I want you to tell that to the listeners.
I definitely think Marc-Andre Fleury is going to make the Hockey Hall of Fame. He has the Stanley Cups. He has the wins. He has the save percentage. He has the resume to get into the Hockey Hall of Fame. However, would he be a first ballot lock if Tom Barrasso wasn't in? That's where I'm questioning it a little bit, just because, Barrasso recently got in obviously a great goaltender. But if he wasn't in yet, how long would it take for Marc-Andre Fleury to get into the Hockey Hall of Fame? That's where I kind of want to throw it back to you, because I was thinking about that. And I have very high standards for the Hockey Hall of Fame. I'm like that with basically any Hall of Fame for sports I follow. I think only the true best of the best should get in. And so I can understand some arguments from people where maybe Fleury shouldn't get in. But again, to me, he's a lock. He has a resume. The Hockey Hall of Fame voting committee, they will look at that, and just one time they'll be like, okay, he's going in. There's not going to be any questions about it. But I'm going to throw that back to you, Pat. If Barrasso wasn't in, how long do you think it would take for Fleury to get in?
I mean, here's the thing. I think this is a difficult discussion to be had because Barrasso's already in. We can't really do the counterfactual of, oh, well, what if a guy like Tom Barrasso doesn't get in? Well, he's in. So that's kind of moot. But then you also look at Barrasso's achievements, and he very much deserves to be in. Wins the Stanley Cup twice. He won the Calder Trophy as the Rookie of the Year in 1984. And in that same year, he also wins the Vezina Trophy, which is an incredible achievement. And then you look at his statistics, and again, you put them in the context of where he played, where goals were scored a lot more often than when the bulk of Marc-Andre Fleury's career has been played. In .892 save percentage, which in that era, very solid save percentage, 369 wins, and he was one of the better goalies of that era. Then you compare it to Marc-Andre Fleury, 3-time Stanley Cup winner, though I would say, and I don't want to take this away from him because I would say it's more 2 Stanley Cups than 3, because 2016 was the Matt Murray show. 2017, though, they don't get past the Washington Capitals without Marc-Andre Fleury. And then his career save percentage is a .912. He's got 561 wins. He's won a Vezina Trophy. He's going to get into the Hall of Fame. He is one of, if not the best, but one of the best goalies of this generation. So I look at Marc-Andre Fleury as a no-doubter to get into the Hall of Fame. Maybe a couple years ago, I would have questioned that, which I think strengthens what you were saying about Barrasso. Now that Barrasso's in, there's no way Marc-Andre Fleury doesn't get in. So
100%. Yeah. If you put Barrasso in, and obviously he's already in, and you look at his numbers, and I agree, when he got in last year, I even said on this show, even though it's an .892 save percentage, that's still really good for the era that he played in, just because scoring was up so high. I mean, today, I think it would have been a lot higher, obviously, with where scoring is now. So again, yeah, you put Barrasso in, you have to put Fleury in with everything he has accomplished in this league.
100%. And that also transitions me to this other point of, you look at the names that have gotten into the Hall of Fame that have made significant stops in Pittsburgh, because if you look at a lot of Hall of Famers, they had a cup of coffee in Pittsburgh. You think of Jerome McGinley, you think of Marian Hossa, and it's like, okay, they're Hall of Famers. They played for the Penguins, but not for long. But then you look at some other names who played big time roles in the Penguins organization, not counting Mario Lemieux, obviously. Jaromir Jagr, he's going to be first ballot as soon as he eventually hangs them up, whenever that may be. Then you have Paul Coffey, Ron Francis, Joey Mullen, Larry Murphy, Mark Recchi, Brian Trottier. These are all guys who played significant roles in championships and spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh, which then I want to do this real quick before we finish up the segment. Putting a few names out there from the Penguins, obviously putting aside guys like Sid, Gino, Letang, etc., who probably should be in the first one, and I'm surprised he's not even in yet, is Sergei Gonchar. It's an absolute crime to me that Sergei Gonchar is not in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
One of the most underrated defensemen of this era. I mean, you look at his stats, 1,300 games, 220 goals, 811 points. Yes, I understand that he does not have a Norris to his name, but he was still insanely consistent throughout his career. Numerous 50 to 60 point campaigns, was great in his own zone. He should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame, bar none. It's ridiculous that he's not in. And I'll also say this. I know this is not fully Penguins related, Pat. It is a joke that Alexander Mogilny is still not in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Absolutely pathetic.
Oh, it's a crime. And then you look at at Gonchar, I mean, he had a run of 9 straight seasons where he had 50 or more
Yeah.
points as a defenseman. And a lot of that was pre-lockout before they changed the rules to upgrade offense. And the fact that he's doing that as a defenseman is absolutely incredible. And then you look at the Penguins' 2009 Stanley Cup run, they do not win that Stanley Cup without Sergei Gonchar. There's a reason he was the general on a power play that helped power them to their first Stanley Cup since 1992. And just the way he was able to consistently be one of the better defensemen in the National Hockey League really says to me, next year, if he's not on the list of nominees to get in, I would be absolutely stunned.
I agree. And I love that you brought up the power play, man. It was a treat watching him quarterback that unit from the top of the point. That unit ran through him every year that he was the quarterback, and it was a treat to watch. A couple other players that we think could be in consideration at some point as well. One of them, Pat, Phil Kessel. That's going to be close. I think he definitely has a case considering what he's done in the NHL. Obviously has back-to-back Stanley Cups with the Penguins. Overall, 413 goals, 992 points, 8 points away from 1,000. What do you think, Pat? Does he get into the Hockey Hall of Fame? I think it's close.
I think he should, because he made himself one of the better American-born players in the history of the league. He was a gigantic contributor for 2 Stanley Cup championships, the first back-to-back championships in the salary cap era. And yeah, he won another one with Vegas, but he was in and out of the lineup, was not really that much of a contributor, especially in the postseason. But then the thing that worries me about him is that the old boys club does not like Phil Kessel. And we know how much influence the old boys club has over the Hockey Hall of Fame. And for some reason, whether it's because he's not, this dedicated hockey 24/7 athlete, he's a little bit weird, he doesn't like to talk all that often, it turns that crowd off. And I think on the numbers alone, I mean, the fact that he's close to 1,000 points, he's won multiple championships, he was one of the best goal scorers in the modern era, he should be in, but I think it's going to be a really uphill battle for him.
Yeah, he's one of the best American players of this generation, and I think in general as well, in my opinion. It's going to be close, I think, for him. But as for Patrick Hornquist, that's someone else I wanted to bring up. Obviously very instrumental in the Penguins' back-to-back Stanley Cup runs in 2016 and 2017. But you look at his overall numbers, Pat, 264 goals, 543 points. I think he's strictly in the Hall of Very Good for me. I don't think he's going to get in overall.
Yeah, I love Patrick Hornquist, always will, but that, like, you nailed it. That's a Hockey Hall of Very Good guy, not a Hockey Hall of Fame guy. Doesn't take away from any of his achievements. He honestly, more than anything, you can pin a lot of the Florida Panthers championship on him, because that was the first real move that Bill Zito made as general manager, and it completely flipped the culture in Florida and helped lead them to a championship.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know that trade wasn't well liked by Penguins fans at the time. And I very much understand Hornquist was loved here very much. But heck, getting Mike Matheson back actually turned out well for the Penguins before he got dealt to Montreal. And I just think overall it was time, just because when you look at Hornquist's contract at the time, I just don't know if he was ever going to live up to that with the Penguins.
No, probably not. But we're running a little long here on this first segment, and I think that will do it for our little Hall of Fame discussion here. When we come back, it's time to move into the present and the past a little bit. We're going to talk about how these Penguins ended this previous season and who the real Pittsburgh Penguins are going into the 24-25 season, and we will do that right after this. And we'll tell you about our first sponsor, and that is eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Available only to U.S. customers. All right, welcome back to the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp, joined as always by the illustrious Hunter Hodes. And the phrase gets used a lot in pro sports of Jekyll and Hyde. Who is this team? What's their identity? Who are they really? And for the 23-24 Penguins, that could not have been more accurate to describe them. Because I went back and looked at this morning, the last 26 games of the Penguins season, and that's not an insignificant amount of time. That's about a quarter of the season. And in their final 13 games, the team made a serious push to the playoffs, ultimately fell short. They went 8-2-3 in those games and looked like a team that was poised to go on a run and make the Stanley Cup playoffs. But in the 13 games before that, 3-8-2, and they looked dead in the water. They did not look like a team that had any hope or chance of making the postseason. So the question to you, Hunter, is this: what team is this really? Are they the team we saw in the final 13 games, or are they the team we saw in the 13 prior to that, and really prior to that for the majority of the season, where they just looked like an average to below average team? So who are these Pittsburgh Penguins?
So before I answer that, I do want to go into some data that I went into after, we were discussing this as a segment. So in those last 13 games, the Penguins scored at least 3 goals in 12 of those final 13 games. They also scored at least 4 goals in 10 of those final 13 games. Before that, in that stretch before where they only won 3 games, they scored 3 or more goals in 5 of 13 games, and they only scored 4 goals 4 times in those 13 games, 4 plus goals, I should say. So in other words, Pat, they started finishing their chances to end the season because they were desperate and they knew that their season was basically on the brink at that point. Overall, though, I think it's kind of closer to the middle. I don't think the Penguins are as good as they were to end this past season, but they weren't nearly as bad as they were in the former 13 games. And I think for, other bad stretches overall, I think this was just a very middling team overall. Yes, the play down the stretch was great. They got great contributions from a lot of players in the lineup. Alex Nedeljkovic was making a lot of great saves, but the thing was, his save percentage wasn't that great. He was the hot hand, but he was still giving up quite a few goals. But the thing was, he was giving them big saves in key moments. Tristan Jarry wasn't doing that. He was giving up a lot of goals, but he wasn't making the key saves in big moments. Nedeljkovic was at least doing that while giving up some goals like Jarry was overall. So to answer your question fully, I think it's kind of a mixed bag. I think this is still, or was at least last year, a very middling team that got hot down the stretch and rode a very insane shooting percentage for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you brought up a really good key point there, and that's the goaltending. I know we've dumped on it, and rightfully so, because Tristan Jarry really fell apart there down the last couple months of the season. And what kind of gets lost is, you brought it up with the goals scored. They just finally started finishing chances, because that has been the through line of the Penguins for the last couple of years, is that you look under the hood, you look at their underlying numbers, and they get chances. They drive offense. They do all the things right. The process is there for the Pittsburgh Penguins to be a good team, but for whatever reason, they just could not finish their chances. They did everything right for the most part to generate offense, to generate goals, but the puck didn't go in. You couple that with Tristan Jarry struggling, and it's just a toxic mix to where they're not scoring and they're not getting saves. Then you look at Alex Nedeljkovic, who everybody loved, and I'm right there with you and everybody else. He had a great stretch down the end of the season, but you really go again and look under the hood, not a whole lot of daylight between him and Tristan Jarry. Big difference was they remembered how to score for the first time in a long time. So if this team going into next year can finish their chances, maybe not at the same rate, but close enough, you could see a world where this team improves and maybe snatches up one of those wild card spots, because I still don't know if they're good enough to finish in the top 3 of the division. I'm very skeptical of that, but if they can at least get some goals, they can make a push to get a wild card spot.
Those final 13 games are the best I've seen this team finish their chances in probably 3 years. That's how long this has been, Pat. I felt like before that, those final 13 games, I had been waiting for this team to start finishing their chances for at least the last few years. Just because you're right. They're great in terms of expected goals, high danger chances, scoring chances per 60 at 5-on-5, but the puck wasn't going in the back of the net until those final 13 games. That's why I'm still a little bit skeptical about that continuing into this next season, because it was still a small sample. Can that continue for a full 82 game season in 2024-25? I mean, we'll see. Again, I'm skeptical, but I just don't know. It's going to be fascinating to see if they can ride that momentum into the season and keep going to the dirty areas, continue getting some maybe dirty looks on the power play, finishing your chances at 5-on-5. If you're able to replicate that at least a little bit to start the season, then maybe the juices will start flowing again, and they'll be like, okay, maybe this wasn't a mirage. But still, right now, I'm a little bit skeptical considering how most of last season went. I'll believe it when I see it, when they go a full season actually finishing a good chunk of their chances.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you on that, in the sense of, I will say this, though, that I don't know if they have the same type of elite finish that they've had in years prior, but I think you add in a full season of Michael Bunting, you add Blake Lizotte, you add Kevin Hayes, you add Anthony Beauvillier. And to be clear, I'm not deeming these guys saviors. I don't think they're going to help pick this team up and make them contenders again. But I think that you now have a group of guys who can score those type of goals, who aren't looking for chances off the rush. They're not looking for the picture perfect highlight reel goal. They're not afraid to go to the front of the net, get beat up, and score dirty goals that you have to earn. And that is something that the Penguins have been lacking for quite some time. Now, I don't expect these guys to go on big time shooting benders and score 20, 25 goals, but 10 to 15, maybe someone gets close to 20. And you might have something there. But again, it's a huge, huge if. But at the very least, I like having those type of players in that position, especially for a team that is struggling to finish, because we saw it, especially in a guy we talked about in the first segment, in Patrick Hornquist. You remember the Penguins prior to him getting here. This team was allergic to the middle of the ice, and he was the antidote to that. He was in front of the net every time he was on the ice. He was not afraid to bully his way to the front of the net. And that completely changed the culture of the Penguins organization at the time, and it was exactly what they needed.
I agree. And I also felt like for parts of last season, I think some of the players, not all of them, but I think some of the players on this team kind of felt entitled for scoring goals. But it's like, no, you still have NHL caliber goaltenders in net that will just swallow these up like it's nothing. And you're not getting to those high danger areas, 5, 10, 15 feet out. They were firing way too many pucks from the perimeter, trying to feel entitled. It's like, no, you have to have a strong work ethic in this league if you want to score goals. And you finally saw that down the stretch. Now, continue it into this season.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is going to be the Penguins' biggest challenge going into this year, but that will do it for this second segment. When we come back, we're just going to take a quick cruise around the league with a couple quick news and notes that have come out over the past 24 hours, and Hunter and I will discuss all that right after this. Before that, though, we will tell you about our next sponsor, and that is Game Time. It's summer. The Pittsburgh Pirates are dead in the middle of a wild card race. And of course, you've got Paul Skeens. Who doesn't want to make their way out to PNC Park to see the Phenom throw in the triple digits? I know I'm looking forward to it this summer, and you can do that with Game Time, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can use some great features like customize your spot, which can help you find some great seats. You'll get last-minute ticket deals, flash deals, and zone deals. It'll be very easy to find and buy MLB tickets for every kind of event at that arena or stadium, and you can get views from your seat in the venue. And of course, there is the Game Time lowest price guarantee. Last minute deals can save you up to 60% on buying last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, and more. Zone deals will save you even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. And all-in pricing will show you the total up front, so you're not hit with any of those surprise fees at checkout. And of course, there's Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find cheaper tickets, Game Time will credit you up to 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the final segment of the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. And thanks, as always, for sticking with us here in the dog days of summer. We appreciate you making it part of your daily routine. I'm Patrick Damp. That's Hunter Hodes. And before we get into the actual quick news and notes segment for Around the League, got to give a shout out to both Michael Bunting and Marcus Pettersson, who both got married this summer. We love to see the boys taking big life steps away from hockey. So a big congratulations to them and their families on their marriages. We love to see it. But first piece of news we want to get to here real quick is that the Columbus Blue Jackets finally have a head coach. They announced that they have hired Dean Evason, formerly of the Minnesota Wild, as their head coach. And Hunter, your thoughts on this hire?
Real good hire, I think, for Columbus. He was a pretty solid coach for Minnesota, had back-to-back 100-point seasons in 21-22 and then 22-23. He made the playoffs 4 times as the Minnesota Wild head coach. He was fired after 19 games this past season, 5-10-4 record. The Wild were just off to a truly horrendous start, and it got a little bit better down the stretch, but they still missed the playoffs. This team was not good during the regular season. But before that, he was still a very good coach in this league, and I do think he's going to have at least some success in Columbus. I think he's probably learned some things during his time in Minnesota. And in terms of coaches available, I think he was the top one alongside Jay Woodcroft. I think this is a strong hire for Columbus. I know Columbus is not going to be that good this year, but I do think they got this move right.
I'm right there with you. I think this is a home run of a hire for the Columbus Blue Jackets, just because you look at his ability to take a team like the Minnesota Wild, who didn't have a ton of talent, all things considered. They had a handful of players who were pretty good, but their salary cap was so messed up because of the Parise and Suter contracts and then the buyouts over them. And he had a .639 winning percentage or points percentage in the regular season with that roster, made the playoffs all 4 years he was their head coach. So this guy knows how to get the most out of a roster that has its flaws. And for a rebuilding team like Columbus, they're going to go through those growing pains. They're going to have young guys. They're going to have some depth players who realistically probably wouldn't be on a contender. So he's going to be able to, at the very least in the next couple of years, get a very young kind of middle of the pack team in Columbus to play meaningful hockey, which is only going to help in the development of those young stars. So very excited to see what he does with Columbus, because we know the Metropolitan Division and the Penguins and Blue Jackets rivalry is only better when that team is good.
He's also a fun, animated coach on the bench. He's done some good things with younger players in Minnesota, but just going back to being fun and animated, he can get loud on the bench. Do you remember the video with him and Rick Bowness? Bowness was just going at him from the other side, and Dean Evason was just like, come over here then. Like, it was just like, come over here and say it to my face. Like, he's just a fun guy on the bench. I really feel like he's going to give off at least good vibes for the Blue Jackets. I think Columbus will be at least a little bit better this year compared to last year. You can't really go that far down, can you? But it's still going to be at least a little bit of time before this team is back to being a playoff team. But you look at the front office, you look at the new coach, I think things are definitely trending up for the Blue Jackets right now, overall, right now, compared to last year.
Yeah, and if there's one thing the Columbus Blue Jackets have needed for a long time is stability in everything they've done. Front office hire, now coaching hire, screams stability, and that's something that they have lacked for quite some time. Finally, we talked about the Metropolitan Division and the Penguins' chances to get into the playoffs yesterday, and there's one team that is really, really confusing to me this summer, and that's the Carolina Hurricanes. They still very much need to figure out what they're going to do with Marty Necas. They still have to sign Jarvis. So this is a team that I look at what they've lost and what they've brought in, and that's a candidate for me in this division to take a step back. What do you think?
Yeah, they've definitely lost a lot of talent this offseason. Gensel leaves, Teravainen's gone, Brady Shea is gone, Brett Pesce is gone. They did gain Sean Walker, which I felt like was a good move. Gostisbehere, pretty sound move from Carolina. But I look at their depth overall, it's taken a big hit, especially at forward. And Eric Tulski's talked about bringing Necas back if they can get him to agree to a contract. But I mean, Necas, it felt like he and his agent were making it clear that he kind of didn't want to go back to Carolina. So I think that's still a situation worth monitoring down in Raleigh. But I do think they will take a step back this year. However, Pat, this is a top 3 team in the Metro until proven otherwise. This is at least a very good regular season team. Playoff wise, I still don't think they have the horses to compete with some of the other contenders, just because game planning for them in the playoffs is easier than other teams, just because, yeah, they fire a lot of pucks at the net, the Carolina Corsies, but they are very much quantity over quality. And you saw that on display again in the second round against the Rangers, who just took them to school.
Yeah, they're not the hardest team to game plan against at this point. If you watch the way they play, like you said, it's quantity over quality. And if
Their
you can
system has to be perfect for it to work, and it requires a lot of work. And you see them get gassed every time the playoffs come around, just because they're going 0 to 100 every time during the regular season.
Yeah, and if you can keep them to the outside the way the Rangers did, then it really negates anything that they have advantage-wise. And I'm right there with you. I'm not saying that they're going to backslide and not be a playoff team, but I think the road to get there for them has got a lot harder. And you mix that with, like you said, the way they play, this could be a bit of a step back for the Carolina Hurricanes going into the 24-25 season. But we know how they are. They always find a way. They always end up surprising us and being one of the better regular season teams. So we'll see what happens with them, but a lot of work for Eric Tulski in his first season as the general manager of the Carolina Hurricanes. But that will do it for us on the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Again, we appreciate you hanging with us here in these dog days of summer. Let us know what you think about the Hall of Fame stuff, about the Metropolitan Division, or even what you just think about the Pittsburgh Penguins, because we know, just like us, you've got opinions. But for Hunter Hodes, I am Patrick Damp. We will be back with a new episode for you on Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you again on Wednesday.